3 weeks ago, we started this series and we looked at Philippians chapter 2, and we noticed two radical themes. Number one, that God came, which, as I've mentioned over the last few weeks now, is something so fundamental, so basic, that it oftentimes fails to sweep us off of our feet. So I wanted to revisit the idea that God came, that God himself came and took on human flesh and frailty, that the problems down here were so big that it took God himself to come and clean up the mess. So the very fact that God came is a big deal. And then we also looked at, from Philippians, how God came. He came in humility, by weakness and defeat. He wore the victor's crown, trod all his foes beneath his feet by being trodden down. He came to show that winning this war involved dying, not killing. An amazing thing we saw from Philippians chapter 2. And then 2 weeks ago, we looked at what God came to say. And we looked at John chapter 8 and saw that God came to speak two words. He came to speak a word of diagnosis, telling us that we're a lot worse off than we think we are. But then he also came to speak a word of deliverance, reminding us that his grace is infinitely bigger than anything we could ever hope for or imagine. And I mentioned that the reason God speaks that first word and then that final word is because we will never ever understand how good God is until we first understand how bad we are. And then last week, we looked at what God came to do specifically. And we looked at Luke chapter 4, and we noticed that Jesus came to set sinners free. He came to set us free from sin and death, from the pressure of having to make it on our own, from the demand to measure up and get it all right. Basically, that whole passage tells us that he came to set us free from the exhaustion of trying to save ourselves. And then he reminds us later that we who are weary can come to him for rest, that his burden is light and his yoke is easy, that he has come to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. And we noticed from Luke chapter 4 that he doesn't simply drop the keys on the outside of the prison cell and shout down, "If you can reach it, you can let yourself out." He doesn't do that. He doesn't hand us a paper clip and tell us to pick the lock from the inside. He comes down and opens the cage and sets us free. And he does so not because we're good, but because he's good. So this week, I want to look at who God came to be. And I couldn't think of a better passage to go to than Isaiah chapter 9 as we seek to answer this question. Okay, we've looked at the fact that God came. We looked at how God came. We looked at what God came to say. And then last week, what God came to do. But who did God come to be for us, for sinners like us? And Isaiah chapter 9, I think, spells it out very, very, very plainly. This passage is all about Christmas. But it's not about Christmas in the ways we typically think about Christmas. In other words, it doesn't first paint a happy picture. It doesn't first paint a picture of joy. It shows us in reality that Christmas is a real conflict. And it shows us here the context into which Isaiah speaks these words of prophecy. It's a context of death, it's a context of despair, it's a context of doom and gloom. And this passage reveals just why Christmas is so necessary, because it showcases this conflict. Christmas really is the beachhead of God's campaign against sin and sadness, against darkness and death. And we see that here, that Christmas is the coming of light and life and love, but it's the coming of light and life and love into the occupied territory of darkness and death and hate. Sounds very much like our own context. Not only did the people in Isaiah's day need good news, but the people in our day need good news. You and I never, ever outgrow our need to hear good news. I mean, Christmas, think about this. Christmas is a war fought by a peaceful prince whose battle plan is to defeat death by dying, fear by forgiveness, and slavery by salvation. That's what it is. So when we think about Christmas, we need to think about it first in terms of why it was necessary. The darkness and the doom and the gloom that is reality apart from Christ. What happens when God comes to be with us? When Emmanuel arrives? What happens in life and what happens in our world minus Jesus? What does our life and what does our world look like before Jesus enters in? And this is what Isaiah shows us here. St. Augustine called the book of Isaiah's prophecy the fifth gospel. And the reason he called it that is because gospel means good news, and Isaiah was speaking good news into a dark world. He announces the coming of hope in a time of hopelessness. The Assyrians, the context in which he speaks this is this. The Assyrians, who were Israel's arch enemies, were on the verge of taking over the promised land, and doom and gloom is on the horizon. And he explains that here. He talks about just how dark it was and how scary it was and how afraid God's people were because their enemies lurked outside the gate, getting ready to come in, pounce. And so they were afraid, understandably. And they were reflecting on the fact that, if we would have just perhaps been more obedient and more faithful to our God who had been faithful to us, then perhaps maybe, this wouldn't be happening. And Isaiah quickly puts down this idea that God's favor is dependent on our merit by announcing this good news, this word of hope in the midst of our hopelessness, in the midst of darkness. He announces light that comes our way minus our merit. It's not that the light comes, it's not that hope arrives because the people of Israel were good enough to earn it. In fact, they were bad enough to deserve God's discipline. And God, in the context of that darkness, announces hope. He announces that in the face of their badness, He will still be good to them. That's the counterintuitive word of the gospel. And I've said this over and over and over again, and the reason I say it over and over and over again is because there's at least one person in this room who needs to hear it over and over and over again, and that is my wife. Just kidding. That is me, okay? Just kidding. It's me, okay? We're good friends, Kim's my best friend. We've known each other since we were teenagers, so we have this, good back and forth, sarcastic. We build each other up by tearing each other down. How's that working for you guys? Working well? I say this stuff over and over and over again because at least I need to hear it. Okay, maybe you're more spiritual and more mature and more godly than me. That wouldn't surprise me. So maybe you don't need to hear it, but I do. This very fact that the gospel is God's announcement that while we were at our worst, God gave us His best. I need to be reminded of that all the time, or else my relationship with God becomes dependent on performance. And I start thinking that so much good behavior from me gets so much love from God, and so much bad behavior from me gets so much less love from God. And then at that point, Jesus becomes irrelevant and unnecessary. He is taken out of the center, and my performance becomes front and center. So I need to be reminded over and over and over again that the gospel is the good news that the worst inherit the wealth, that slaves become sons, that while we were at our worst, God gave us His best. And that's what's happening here in the context of great darkness and despair and death. Isaiah comes and announces good news to the people of Israel who deserve whatever they might be getting. And we find ourselves in a very similar situation. I mean, on Friday, I was shocked. I don't know when you heard the news of what happened in Connecticut, but it was late morning for me before I heard about it, and I was shocked. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be shocked anymore, you know? I mean, these things seem to happen pretty regularly, and yet I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And as I was thinking about this passage and the context in which Isaiah spoke good news, a word of hope, announcing that God is gloriously intruding our darkness with his light, I thought, this is not only news that the people in Isaiah's day needed to hear, this is news that people yesterday and today and tomorrow need to hear. Until Jesus comes back, this is our context. Doom and gloom is always waiting on our horizon. We never know what this afternoon is going to bring. We never know what tomorrow will bring. We just know that we're broken people living in a broken world with other broken, messed up people. And that means that doom and gloom is always waiting around the corner. Always. And so God, in the context of this doom and gloom, makes this glorious announcement that the best is yet to come. That even in the face of your faithlessness, I will be faithful. I will be your God, and you will be my people. That there is nothing you can do to wiggle away from your sonship and daughtership. It's impossible. You can misbehave, but you can never, ever be disowned. You can be disciplined, but never disowned. I will be faithful. And it's where it is in the context of our faithlessness that we see God's faithfulness in great color. And it's amazing. I said this last week, but for me, and I would assume for most of you too, if you can think back to the time when God saved you, it wasn't when things were really going well for you, was it? I mean, who recognizes their need for a Savior if life is going well? I mean, some sort of circumstance or tragedy takes place or took place in your life, as it did in mine, which helped me to see just how small I was and helped me to see that there was nothing I could do to attain for myself those things that I longed for most. There was nothing. As I've said before, that God's office is at the end of our rope. That's where he meets us. And so here, Isaiah speaks this great word to a nation at the end of their rope, a nation in fear. He speaks this good news into your life, into my life, into lives that are marked with fear and frustration and tension, which marks all of us in 1,000 different ways. I mean, many of us are daily reminded of financial fears. Financial fears. I mean, I know handfuls of you for whom Christmas scares you to death because you have no idea how you're going to pay for it. Okay? Or, I mean, it's hard for you to pay your bills every month, and your car just broke down, and you don't know what to do. Okay? I mean, financial fears. Now, I mean, then you have, that's on the one end, and then I also know others of you who have plenty of money, but you live in the context of financial fear that the economy's bad and you might lose it all. What would happen or what would become of you if you lost it? So we live in a reality of fear in so many different ways. We We know what relational tension feels like. We live in fear that our kids are going to go off the deep end, that we might be single for the rest of our lives, that people might find out who we really are. That's your life, that's mine. Okay, and just when you think it's not, as I've said before, then you can be the first to volunteer all of your thoughts and feelings that go through you for just 3 hours that we can document and put on the big screen with your name and picture underneath, okay? Of course we live in that fear. I do. I mean, we live. I'm afraid for my kids. I'm afraid for this world. I'm afraid for me. You know, I used to be really bad, okay? And now I'm really good. Just kidding. But I mean, for the first 5 years of my Christian life, I can remember living in perpetual fear that I don't ever want to make the same mistakes that I made before I was a Christian. So the first 5 years of my Christian life was one of absolute fear and bondage. I was living my life not to make mistakes, instead of living my life for the one whose blood covers my mistakes. Okay? Big difference. So we live in this fear. Even Christian people, we live in this fear, and this dark and gloomy reality, as I said, was not just back then. This is yesterday, it's today, it's tomorrow, it's our world, it's our country, it's our city, it's our neighbor, it's our family, it's you, it's me. And Christmas, for many, brings this out, doesn't it? I mean, it's both joy and gloom. It's excitement and stress. I mean, we love the decorations, we love the presents, we love the family and the friends. Christmas really is, in so many ways, the best time of the year. I was talking to Jenna about this the other day. I said, Jenna's my 11-year-old daughter. And I said, what do you like better, Christmas or your birthday? Okay. It's like saying, do you like yourself or Jesus better? Okay, I'm just kidding. I didn't put it in those terms. I said, what do you like better, your birthday or Christmas? And she said, Christmas. And I said, why? And she said, all of these things I just mentioned. I just love the songs, and I love the decorations, and I just love not only getting presents, but thinking about buying presents for other people, and all of those sorts of things. She just loves the season. I mean, Christmas really is, in many ways, the best time of the year. But Christmas is also that time of feeling the pressure to get the right present. Okay? Husbands, I know you feel this pressure. I do. I mean, I love my wife. She's my best friend. She is my best friend, okay? But I'm scared to death of her birthday, Valentine's Day, and Christmas. Scared to death. I'm like, I don't know. And I don't know if this happens with you, okay? But this happens with Kim and me. I buy presents for her the way I want people to buy presents for me. And she buys presents for me the way she wants people to buy presents for her. So I get gift cards, just because that's all I want, I just want a gift card. Just give me a gift card, I can go buy what I want. Well, there's not a whole lot of creativity in gift cards, because I'm not a terribly creative person, so that's all I want, gift cards. So all I do is give Kim a bunch of gift cards, okay? Kim is very thoughtful, and she's very detailed, and so she likes little things that say, I thought about you. She's a much better person than I am in that regard. In that regard, okay? I'm in trouble, aren't I, sweetie? No. So she's got a little gossip corner going on over there in the corner. She's rallying the troops now for an attack after the service. But so she buys, she knows I love hot sauce. So every year she goes out and she finds, the hottest new hot sauce she can buy and put it in my stocking. She just little detailed things that she does. Which is why Christmas is so scary for me. I'm being serious. I mean, I have for the last 3 weeks been going, oh my gosh, and if you ask them, this, husbands, if you say, give me a list of things you want, that makes it easy. It's the way most of us approach the Christian life. Just give me a list so I can check it off. It makes it easy. I just go to the store and I take out my wallet and I just buy the stuff there. Well, at times they can get offended by that too. Well, why do you need a list? Don't you know me well enough that you don't need a list? You know? I'm like, gosh, you can't win for losing. So I know it sounds silly, but there is that additional stress, okay? Are you going to forget someone? What about Christmas cards? Do we make one this year? Who do we send it to if we make one? What about Christmas parties? Have we been invited to one? Were we not invited to this one? Should we host one? If so, who should we invite? You know, there's always this perpetual fear around Christmas time that you're either going to be offended or you're going to offend someone. I mean, Christmas is the time when budgets break, when you're reminded just how dysfunctional your family is. Okay? All of us have a cousin Eddie in our families. Okay? See Christmas Vacation? Cousin Eddie? Jeez, you guys need to get out more. I mean, all of us have someone like that. I mean, for my own family, for my extended family, there are members of my own family who, because of either death or divorce, this past year, will be dealing with Christmas in a very different way than they've ever had to deal with it before. And that's true for some of you too. In other words, the Christmas season has a way of revealing why Christmas was necessary. It reveals our deepest frustrations and fears, our most sincere sadness and suspicions. I mean, and this is what Isaiah is describing. He's describing our reality, life under the sun. It is tears, it is pain, it is confusion, it is fear, it is death. And he doesn't just describe this reality with words. Notice what he says in verse 5. He describes the boot of the trampling warrior in battle. He describes the garment soaked in blood. I mean, he describes our violent reality. That our lives have been vandalized by sin and brokenness. That this world has been vandalized by sin and brokenness. And it seems terminal. I mean, there's nothing in creation, there's nothing in ourselves, there's no nation, there's no government that can turn mourning into dancing, that can drive out the darkness of death with the light of life. If there is a solution, it must come from above the sun, from what he says in verse 1, from a land beyond the Jordan. Help has to come from the outside. One of the frustrating things when something like what happened this past Friday happens is all of the talking heads come out immediately and prescribe a solution to the problem. You know, gun control, bad parenting. I mean, I heard it all. It's both frustrating and it's sad. It's frustrating because it assumes that if we just fixed something here or there, or just elect the right person, or if we just legislate the right law, if we just put together a few more classes in parenting, or maybe train a few more doctors to be able to diagnose other kinds of mental problems, then these things wouldn't happen. And it just reminded me over and over and over again of those remarkable words of Winston Churchill that I said in my prayer, that the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. We can't fix it. And we've tried since Genesis chapter 3 to fix our own problems, to set things straight on our own, to make things right on our own, to straighten out those things in our lives and in this world that are crooked. To no avail. We're like the carnival person who spins plates. We've got 10 plates and we get them going, and the moment we get down to plate 8, 9, and 10 and get them spinning, plates 1, 2, and 3 stop. And so we spend our lives spinning plates. We spend our lives cleaning up the outside of the tree, cleaning up the rotten fruit on the outside, on the branches, without the root ever being addressed. The gospel addresses the root. God addresses the root. There is nothing. I mean, this problem seems terminal. There's nothing that can turn our mourning into dancing. There's nothing in creation. There's nothing in ourselves. There's no nation. There's no government that can ultimately fix our biggest problems. Nothing that can drive out the darkness of death with the light of life. And this is precisely what Isaiah sees. And then he says, however, an implied but. In the context of this doom and gloom, Isaiah sees a light at the end of the tunnel. And he describes in verse 1, there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has the light shone. And then he goes on to describe this figure that he sees, this sort of hazy black and white figure off in the distance, on the horizon. This figure appearing who will one day restore his people. He sees a rescuer, a leader, a redeemer, a savior. He looks beyond the darkness and he sees the dawn of a new day. In the face of this doom and gloom, Isaiah tells us something about this figure. This off in the distance figure that he sees coming on the horizon. And he says, to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And it's not this great warrior riding in on a lightning bolt that he describes. He says a child is born. A son is given. You'd think that the people of Israel would say, well, that's a sweet story. But I'm looking on the other side of this wall, and I'm thinking to myself, Isaiah, we need more than a child. Okay, we need more than a son. I mean, that's a sweet bedtime story that I can tell my children, but I mean, we need William Wallace yesterday. Okay? And Isaiah says, a child is born, a son is given, and at this announcement, the mood changes. It's like that great scene, I don't know if you remember this scene in C.S. Lewis's Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And, of course, the land of Narnia is under the curse of the White Witch. And in the words of Lewis, it's always winter but never Christmas. That's the way he describes the curse on the land of Narnia. And word gets out that Aslan is on the move. No one has seen him yet. But word gets out that Aslan, the Christ figure, is on the move. And the snow begins to melt. And in the words of C.S. Lewis, winter begins working backwards. Flowers begin to bloom. Spring is in the air. Well, this is what the people of Israel are beginning to see and to sense at this announcement that a child is born, that a son is given. And notice too, this son is given, not earned, not even asked for. Okay, this son is given. This is the one, this is the seed of the woman that God promised in Genesis chapter 3, who would come and crush the head of the serpent. We've waited a long time, but he's finally on the horizon. He's coming. This is the one who God is sending to clean up the mess we made, to fix what we broke. This is the one. And this son is given. He's a child of my promise. He is a product of my promise, not your good behavior, not even your request. As we'll see next week in John chapter 1, we weren't asking for a helper. He came, and when he came, we killed him because we were so convinced we could do it on our own. It was offensive that he was coming to do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And so we hung him on a cross. It's the offense of the gospel. I've said this on numerous occasions that we all hate law, because the law tells us what to do. But we typically hate grace even more because grace tells us that there's nothing we can do. And if there's anything we hate more than being told what to do, it's being told that there's nothing we can do. That we're weak and we're needy and helpless in and of ourselves. Well, this is the one. This is the Son, and He's given. Not asked for, not earned. He's given. And not only is He given, but notice He's given to who? To us. This is a gift from God to those who are hopeless and burdened and broken and scared and weak. And then He says 4 things about this child. This child is a wonderful counselor. He's a mighty God. He's an everlasting Father. He's a Prince of Peace. The phrase wonderful counselor literally means the wonder counselor. I mean, this rescuer, this redeemer, Jesus, comes as our supernatural counsel. He doesn't simply identify felt needs and offer Band-Aid solutions and tell us how to clean up the outside of the tree. It's not why He came. He came to cut down the old tree and to plant a brand new one. He doesn't simply identify the problems on the outside. He kills us on the inside so that new life might spring forth. He knows everything about us. He knows what we need. Your hopes and your fears, your dreams and your longings are not anonymous to Jesus. He is a wonder counselor. He doesn't just deal with the outside things. More importantly, He deals with the inside things. And then mighty God literally means God is a warrior. We don't typically think about God in those ways. If you ask the average person on the street, they would probably say that if there's a God at all, He's this great grandfather in the sky who overlooks mistakes and problems and just distributes unconditional love to everybody in the exact same way, and that He can't be offended. Okay, but this is a different picture. I mean, what we're getting here is a God who is a warrior. He's a conqueror. A conqueror of what? Well, He comes to kill us, to make us alive. He's a conqueror of sin and death. He's a conqueror of our enemy, which is not only those things outside of us, the world and the devil, but that thing inside of us, namely the flesh. He comes to kill us. He works against us, for us. He's big enough to put us to death. He comes as a warrior, as a conqueror against death and darkness and sin and slavery. He breaks the power of canceled sin and sets the prisoner free. His blood can make the foulest clean. His blood avails for me. He's a warrior. Make no mistake about it. This child is a mighty God. He does have the power to clean up the mess that we made. He does have the power to crush the serpent's head. The seed of the woman has the capacity to crush the head of the serpent. And He also comes as an everlasting Father. He not only protects, but He provides. He provides all of us with what our hearts long for most: love and meaning and approval and security. He's a good Father who provides, and He not only provides these things temporally, but He provides these things forever. He's an everlasting Father. The provision that everything we need in Christ we have never runs out. His grace is inexhaustible. 70 times 7 His forgiveness comes our way. We cannot out-sin God's forgiveness. It's unbelievable to me. My kids can out-sin my forgiveness, okay? I mean, maybe not in the long run. But I've told you the story before about, Jenna and her prepubescent temper tantrums, okay? And I'm a much more laid-back dad with my third child than I was with my boys, who were almost 18 and 16. And, Jenna will oftentimes lose her temper just because her mother asks her to do her homework, okay? She'll lose her temper, she'll stomp her feet, she'll, I hate you, mother, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, okay? Run off to her room and slam the door. And I'm sitting on the couch. I'm a terrible father because I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just laughing, okay? I mean, Kim's laughing too. We look at each other and every time Jenna throws a temper tantrum, when our kids, our older boys were small and they threw temper tantrums, Kim and I were beside ourselves. I mean, if we don't fix this problem, they're gonna end up in prison, okay? All of us parents, when we deal with our first couple children, think that if we don't get everything right, they're gonna be criminals. Okay, thank God that's not true. I know parents who did everything right and their kids turned out all wrong, and I know parents who did everything wrong and their kids turned out all right. That is more descriptive of me. Anyway, so, Jenna will be in her room, and after throwing this temper tantrum and telling us that she hates us and she hates the family and, blah, 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 and stomps her feet, slams the door, and Kim and I'm sitting in one room, Kim's in the other, we kind of catch each other's eyes and we just start laughing, okay? And then Jenna, about 5 minutes later, comes out, head hung low, and just, Mommy, I'm so sorry. I mean, I should never have said that I hated you and I hated this family. Please forgive me. And Kim will say, honey, listen, you understand how hard it is to forgive you when you did this 4 times already today? It's hard for me to believe that you're really being sincere in your apology. As soon as Kim says that, she loses it again, okay? I hate you, mother, you don't forgive me when I sin, blah, 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 blah. And then I laugh even harder, It's unbelievable, okay? All that to say, it's possible for my kids, at least in the short term, to out-sin my forgiveness. It's not possible to out-sin God's forgiveness as his child. He is an everlasting Father. Everlasting. While our sin reaches far, his grace reaches farther, and it reaches so far that we can't see the beginning from the end. He casts our sin away as far as the east is from the west, and in the words of Corrie ten Boom, he drops our sin into the deepest part of the ocean and then puts up a sign that says, no fishing allowed. The sin we cannot forget, God cannot remember. His grace is everlasting. His forgiveness is inexhaustible. But he also comes as a Prince of Peace, which literally means the administrator of Shalom. Love that picture. This administrator of Shalom, this executive of Shalom. He is the one who sets things straight. He is the one who comes to clean things up. He is the one who brings restoration to our lives and to this world. He came to reweave the fraying fabric of our lives. Jesus came to fix what is broken, to bring light in the darkness, beauty out of ashes. He came to make all things new. The word shalom in the Bible means more than peace of mind or inner calmness. It means universal flourishing. It basically is a description of the way God originally intended things to be. Everything about you in this world working in perfect harmony. That's why one writer, Cornelius Plantinga, describes sin as the vandalism of shalom. Sin breaks things apart and disintegrates things, and Jesus comes as the administrator of Shalom to reweave the fraying fabric of our lives in this world, to make all things new. So ironically, it's the thickness of irony to say that it is this crying baby that will wipe away every tear as our wonderful counselor. It is this powerless child that will conquer death and darkness as our mighty God. It is this needy newborn that will be the source of all our provision as our everlasting Father. It is this helpless infant that will restore harmony to our lives and to this world as our Prince of Peace. And this is the news that we've been waiting for, that they were waiting for, that we've been waiting for, that sadness will give way to joy, that darkness and death will give way to light and life, that mourning will be turned into dancing. It's the news that we hope is true, the news that we want to be true. Martin Luther used to make fun of people who would go up looking for God in the clouds and find no one there. He said they found no one there because the God they were trying to go up to has already come down. I remember my grandmother telling the story. She was unbelievably funny and witty, telling the story of the Russian cosmonaut who went into space and announced back to the Soviet Union that he's been to space and there is no God. And my grandmother said, well, he looked in the wrong place. If he would have simply taken off his spacesuit and gotten out of his spaceship, he would have seen God immediately, okay? Well, that was sort of my grandmother's 20th century version of what Luther used to say. This God has come down. He's come down because we could not go up. This wonderful counselor, this mighty God, this everlasting Father, this Prince of Peace has come down into our darkness, into our despair, into our brokenness. From above the sun, outside help has arrived. And that's what we celebrate. When we celebrate Christmas in general, but more specifically when we celebrate the Lord's Supper. When we celebrate the Lord's Supper, it is God telling us that He has come to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. We're forgetful people. Okay, we just are. We're forgetful people. And so God condescends to us in a variety of ways to remind us that He is God and we are not, and that there's nothing we could do to save ourselves. And so He institutes preaching as one way to remind sinners that they need God. He institutes the sacraments, baptism, as a way of reminding people that it's God who makes sinners alive. He institutes the Lord's Supper as a way of reminding us that it's Christ's body and blood broken and shed for sinners that sets them free. When we celebrate the Lord's Supper, God is reminding us that none of our self-salvation projects will ever be successful. And it's an invitation to those who are weary and heavy laden to come and rest, to live your life under a banner that reads, "It is finished." To be reminded that Jesus' burden is light and His yoke is easy because He has paid the debt that we owe.